Okay, so we're diving into this whole remote work thing and like how to actually find that work-life balance everyone's always talking about.
Definitely.
We're talking like not just surviving, but really thriving, you know?
Yeah, because it's a whole new world now, right? Like, gone are the days of that typical 9 to 5.
Right.
It's all about flexibility now.
Exactly.
But we've got to be careful because that can easily turn into always being on if you're not careful.
Totally. And that's where all these articles we've got come in.
For
Like we've
sure.
got tips and strategies for like designing the perfect remote work day.
It's a roadmap.
Yeah. But before we get into all of that,
Okay.
let's like define what work-life balance actually means.
Mm.
You know, when your office is kind of wherever you want it to be.
That's a really good point because it's not like this black and white thing, like just splitting your time 50-50 between work and your personal life.
Right.
It's more about figuring out what works for you. You know what your own rhythm is and creating a sustainable schedule that lets you crush your goals at work, but also feel good.
It's like finding that sweet spot, right?
Yes.
Where you're like energized and loving work and your personal life.
Exactly. And you're not burnt out.
No burnout.
And the articles really stressed how important that is for both your mental and physical health.
Oh, for sure.
Because that kind of chronic stress from not having that balance can really mess you up over time.
Yeah, one article even said there's like a higher risk of heart disease and depression when your work-life balance is totally off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's serious.
Yeah, that's really serious.
And it's not just, about feeling stressed. It can also impact your relationships.
Absolutely.
If you're always on, you can't really be present with people you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So how do we find that balance? Like, what can our listeners actually do to stop work from taking over their lives?
Well, one thing that kept coming up in all the articles was setting boundaries. It sounds simple enough, but it's really hard to do when you're working from home.
Especially with those quick checks after hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then suddenly it's like 9 p.m. and you're drowning in emails.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of the articles talked about having a dedicated workspace.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy.
Right.
But just having a spot that's just for work can really help your brain get into that work mode and, more importantly, switch out of it at the end of the day.
It's like when you physically leave an office.
Exactly.
It's like you're closing the door on work, even if it's just a mental door.
Yeah. Imagine it's Friday afternoon, you close your laptop, and boom, you're in your happy place.
I love that.
Not staring at a screen anymore.
It's like a mental escape hatch.
Exactly.
Okay. But what about when you really need to focus?
Yeah.
And the fridge is calling your name.
Right.
How do you stay productive at home?
A lot of the articles were all about productivity techniques.
Okay.
And not just mentioning them, but really breaking down how to use them.
Right.
Like the Pomodoro technique, where you work for 25 minutes and then take a break.
Oh, yeah. Like a mental sprint.
Exactly.
And then a little break to recharge.
Yeah.
Could any of the articles mention any specific tools or apps to help with that? They did, actually.
Oh, yeah.
One article talked about apps like Microsoft To Do and Evernote,
Okay.
which are good for like reminders and keeping you organized.
Yeah.
You can even use them as like a work journal,
Oh, that's a good idea.
to keep track of what's working and what's not.
Totally.
Speaking of taking a step back,
Yeah.
the articles were also really into taking breaks during the day.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You got to step away from the computer.
Right.
And not just to like grab more coffee and get right back to it.
Right.
You have to really disconnect.
Yeah.
One article even suggested using apps like Headspace for mindfulness exercises.
Like a little midday meditation.
Exactly.
I like it. But what about people who aren't fully remote?
Right?
Like what about the hybrid work situation?
Oh, yeah, that can be tricky.
Because it's like you're trying to balance two different worlds.
Exactly.
Did the articles have any advice for that?
Yeah, they did actually.
Okay, good. Because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are in that boat.
For sure.
So what'd they say?
The biggest thing was sticking to a routine, even on the days you're working from home.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because it's easy to slip into like a more relaxed mode when you're at home, right?
Yeah, totally.
But the article said that sticking to a schedule,
Okay.
even for little things like getting dressed
Well,
or
yeah.
setting up a workspace,
So like maybe skip the sweatpants.
maybe save those for the weekend.
Uh-huh. Okay, good to know.
It's really about creating that separation in your mind.
Between work and home.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about what individuals can do.
Right.
But what about employers?
Oh, yeah.
Like what's their role in all of this?
That's a big one.
Because they have to create an environment that supports this whole work-life balance thing.
Absolutely. The articles were very clear about that.
Okay.
It's not all on the employee.
Right.
So we're talking more than just like casual Fridays and free snacks.
Yeah, exactly. Although those are always nice.
Of course.
But it's going to be deeper than that.
Definitely.
Ah.
The articles talked a lot about needing actual structural changes within companies.
Like what? Give us some examples.
So things like offering flexible schedules,
Oh.
providing mental health resources.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, and like actually respecting boundaries when it comes to communication outside of work hours.
So it's about trust, really,
Yes,
and making people feel comfortable setting those boundaries.
exactly. One article even mentions some companies that are now offering their remote workers access to co-working spaces.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah,
Because they realize that sometimes you just need a change of scenery.
I get that for sure.
Right.
It's all about having options.
Exactly.
Oh, speaking of options, one of the things that really stuck with me was this idea of geographic arbitrage.
Oh, yes.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, it's like you're using remote work to your advantage to live in different places
Yeah.
and still have a great career.
It's like being a digital nomad,
Exactly.
but like with a plan.
Right. It's not just about traveling for fun.
It's strategic.
Yes. You're picking places that fit your work style
Yeah.
and maybe even help you be more productive.
One article talked about this night owl
Okay.
who found this groove working remotely from Europe
Oh, wow.
because they could sync up their schedule with the later time zone there.
That's so smart.
And it actually worked for them.
That's amazing.
Right.
It just shows how much freedom you have with remote work.
Totally.
Yeah.
You can design your ideal lifestyle.
Exactly.
But even if you're not about to pack your bags and work from a beach in Bali,
Right.
there are still so many ways to make remote work for you.
Absolutely.
Right. Like what else did the article say?
Well, one thing they emphasized was the importance of networking,
Even if you're remote.
especially if you're remote.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because it's so easy to feel isolated when you're not seeing your coworkers every day.
Totally. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly.
You got to be proactive about staying connected.
Exactly. And speaking of being proactive, another big theme was advocating for yourself,
Oh, interesting.
like within your company.
Okay.
Because even the best remote jobs aren't perfect, right?
Good. Well-
Sometimes you need to like speak up and say what you need.
I like that.
One article even talked about having some questions ready for job interviews.
Oh, that's smart. What kind of questions?
So, like, what's the company culture like when it comes to after-hours communication?
Okay.
Or how do you handle vacation requests?
Okay.
Things like that.
Right.
So you can get a sense of how seriously they take work-life balance.
That's a good idea
Yeah,
because it shows you're already thinking about those boundaries
exactly.
right from the start.
You have the power to create your ideal work life.
Totally.
And if your current job isn't letting you do that,
Yeah.
maybe it's time to look for a new one.
For sure.
Yeah.
There are so many remote opportunities out there right now.
So many.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today.
We really have.
We talked about boundaries,
Yeah.
productivity, getting support from your employer, even like that whole digital nomad thing.
It's a lot.
I know, right?
Uh-huh.
So what was your biggest takeaway?
That's a good question.
What stuck with you the most?
I think what really resonated with me was that it's not just about finding balance.
Yeah.
It's about being intentional,
Ooh, I like that.
about how you spend your time, how you use your energy, even like what kind of work environment you're in.
So true.
You're designing a life that you actually enjoy.
Yes. That's such a good point.
It's not one size fits all.
Right.
It's about figuring out what works for you
Absolutely.
and creating a structure that supports that.
And that might look different for everyone.
For sure.
The important thing is to just keep trying new things.
Yeah.
And like advocate for what you need
Absolutely.
until you find that perfect setup.
Well said.
This was awesome. Thanks for diving into this with me.
This was really fun.
And for everyone listening, remember,
Yeah.
you are not alone in this whole remote work thing.
There's a whole community out there doing this with you.
Exactly. So, yeah, embrace the flexibility, make your well-being a priority,
Yes.
and don't be afraid to ask for what you need.
Love it.
Until next time, happy working, everyone.